Imagine waking up to the news that the very funds meant to save lives and rebuild nations are instead being funneled into the chaos of war, a revelation that shakes the very foundation of what we believe humanitarian aid to be. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most controversial and disturbing subjects of modern geopolitics, the dark side of USAID and its alleged connection with covert CIA operations. Is USAID truly just about providing relief and development? Or is it a sophisticated tool used to manipulate regimes and even incite conflict? We will explore declassified documents, shocking historical examples, and hard-hitting casualty figures that reveal a pattern too unsettling to ignore. Stay with me as we uncover how foreign aid has sometimes been weaponized to serve ulterior geopolitical interests. When USAID was established in 1961 under President John F. Kennedy, its mission was heralded as a beacon of hope for developing nations, a way to bring stability and prosperity to regions in need. Yet, almost from the start, whispers emerged that USAID was more than just a charitable organization. Behind its benevolent facade, USAID became entangled with covert operations designed to advance U.S. geopolitical interests. Intelligence agencies found a perfect cover in USAID, using its programs to support regimes and opposition groups that aligned with American strategic goals. Over time, this blending of humanitarian aid and covert operations laid the groundwork for many of the conflicts we witness today. One of the most chilling early examples of this dynamic occurred in Indonesia during the mid-1960s. Amidst the global Cold War, the United States was determined to prevent the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. USAID was deployed under the guise of economic assistance, yet it quickly became a tool for subversion. Behind closed doors, USAID funds were funneled into anti-communist militias and propaganda campaigns. The result was catastrophic. The violent purge that ensued led to the deaths of over 500,000 people. Families were torn apart, communities decimated, and a legacy of trauma was etched into the nation's history. Declassified documents later revealed that USAID's financial support was not merely collateral aid but a deliberate part of a broader strategy to dismantle Indonesia's socialist government. This harrowing chapter serves as a stark reminder of how humanitarian aid can be manipulated to serve darker political ends. Fast forward to the 1980s, and the story repeats itself in Afghanistan. During the Soviet-Afghan War, the United States found itself locked in a proxy conflict against Soviet expansion. Under the banner of humanitarian aid, USAID funneled billions of dollars into Afghanistan. However, these funds were quickly diverted to support the Mujahideen, a coalition of armed groups fighting the Soviet forces. What began as a program to aid in reconstruction soon morphed into a conduit for arming soldiers. However, a case can be made here that the arming of these soldiers was necessary to counteract the invasion of their country. But here is the kicker: after the war ended, the surviving soldiers formed the group known as the Taliban, and when they tried to rule themselves, the US came back and entered into a prolonged war with them. What is interesting is that there is sufficient evidence that the US was still funding them even while they were at war with them. To benefit the military-industrial complex? Who knows? The human cost was enormous. Estimates suggest that over 2 million Afghans lost their lives during the prolonged conflict, while more than 3.5 million were forced to flee their homes. And in the end, the Taliban still remained in power. So much money and so many lives destroyed. For nothing. The 1980s also witnessed USAID's controversial role in Latin America, particularly in Nicaragua. Here, the U.S. government saw a left-leaning government as a threat to regional stability and American interests. Under the guise of humanitarian assistance, USAID began channeling funds to opposition groups known as the Contras. These rebels, supported covertly by USAID money, engaged in brutal tactics, massacres, targeted assassinations, and widespread terror campaigns against civilians. The true scale of the devastation is hard to overstate. Tens of thousands of Nicaraguans lost their lives, entire communities were obliterated, and a generation grew up in an environment of fear and mistrust. Although Congress later tried to curb these activities with stricter oversight and funding bans, USAID managed to exploit legal loopholes and continue its support covertly. The Nicaraguan case remains one of the most egregious examples of how U.S. foreign aid can be diverted to fund operations that, far from promoting democracy, actually foster brutality and human suffering. In more recent years, the Syrian civil war has become a battleground not only for local factions but also for global powers seeking to influence the region's future. USAID's involvement in Syria has been no less controversial. In 2012, during the early stages of the conflict, billions of dollars in humanitarian aid were poured into the country. However, investigations revealed a disturbing pattern. A significant portion of these funds ended up in the hands of militant groups, some of which were later linked to organizations like Jabhat al-Nusra. In one particularly shocking case, an audit in 2018 exposed that USAID funded NGOs that had inadvertently become conduits for arms and financial resources that fueled the insurgency. The human toll in Syria has been staggering: over 500,000 people killed, millions displaced, and entire cities reduced to rubble. This isn't just a tragic byproduct of war. It's a clear example of how the mismanagement and diversion of aid can escalate conflict, prolong suffering, and destabilize entire regions. The misuse of foreign aid isn't confined to Asia and the Middle East. It has also left a bitter mark on Africa. Consider Ethiopia in the 1980s. Amid a devastating famine, USAID stepped in with aid that was meant to save lives. Instead, much of the aid money was siphoned off by corrupt officials and used to purchase weapons. This not only deepened the famine, but also exacerbated the Ethiopian civil war, leading to over 1 million deaths and massive internal displacement. In Sudan, a similar pattern emerged in the 2000s. USAID funds intended for development and humanitarian relief were diverted to support South Sudanese rebel groups. When South Sudan eventually gained independence in 2011, the misdirected aid had helped fuel a brutal civil war that claimed over 400,000 lives and displaced millions more. These cases illustrate how the diversion of aid funds can directly contribute to prolonged conflicts and human tragedies. As we examine these case studies, a disturbing pattern emerges. USAID is repeatedly used not just to promote development, but as a tool to advance U.S. strategic interests, often at the expense of human lives. The process is almost systematic. Funds are allocated under the banner of humanitarian aid, but once they enter volatile regions, they are diverted into the hands of groups that align with U.S. geopolitical goals. This is done through covert operations, legal loopholes, and sometimes even direct collusion with intelligence agencies. The result is a self-perpetuating cycle of instability, where aid intended to save lives ends up causing more death and destruction. Imagine an engine running on pure irony. Billions in aid, designed to promote peace and development, becomes the very fuel that powers war machines and insurgencies. The irony is as bitter as it is shocking, and it raises profound questions about accountability and the true purpose of foreign aid in our modern world. One of the most contentious debates around this issue is whether the actions taken under the guise of U.S. aid violate fundamental U.S. principles. The U.S. Constitution is supposed to be the bedrock of American values, protecting individual rights and limiting government overreach. Yet, when it comes to foreign policy and covert operations, those protections can become alarmingly muted. Historically, presidential power in foreign affairs has been immense. Executive orders have been issued that bypass congressional oversight, and in times of crisis, the checks on presidential authority have often been weakened. But when that power is used to fund actions that directly lead to loss of life and human suffering, the moral and legal implications become staggering. Critics argue that such actions not only undermine the Constitution, but also betray the core American values of freedom, justice, and respect for human life. The debate isn't just academic, it touches on the real-life consequences of these policies, consequences that continue to ripple through nations and generations. When we look at the real-world impact, the numbers are both staggering and tragic. In Indonesia, the anti-communist purges that followed USAID's covert support claimed the lives of over 500,000 people. In Afghanistan, the legacy of aid-fueled conflict includes not only millions of deaths and displaced individuals but also the emergence of extremist groups that still haunt the global stage. In Nicaragua and Syria, the human cost of misdirected aid is measured in tens of thousands of lives lost and entire communities uprooted. In Africa, the diversion of aid has contributed to civil wars and famines that have decimated populations and left scars that may never fully heal. These aren't just numbers, they represent real human beings whose lives were upended by policies that prioritized strategic gains over human welfare. The connection between foreign aid and war is a brutal reminder that when money intended to nurture is instead used to destroy, the consequences are irreversible and far-reaching. Internationally, the misuse of aid has not only tarnished America's reputation but also destabilized regions for decades. In Latin America, the long shadow of USAID's involvement in coups and counter-revolutions still influences political dynamics today. In the Middle East, the diversion of aid funds has contributed to a cycle of violence that shows no signs of ending. And in Africa, the misappropriation of aid has sown seeds of distrust towards international organizations and foreign governments alike. Looking ahead, the implications are chilling. If the pattern continues, foreign aid could become an even more potent weapon in the arsenal of global powers, a tool for engineering conflicts, toppling governments, and reshaping borders. This raises an urgent question: can the international community reform these systems before more lives are lost? And can accountability ever be truly achieved when the lines between aid and covert warfare are so blurred? The evidence is clear: USAID has, time and again, been used as a tool to advance covert political agendas, often with devastating consequences for the people it purports to help. While the agency claims to be dedicated to humanitarian aid and development, the reality is far more complex and, frankly, disturbing. The line between humanitarian assistance and military intervention has been repeatedly crossed, leaving a legacy of conflict, chaos, and human suffering in its wake. So, as we stand here today, we must ask ourselves, what is the true purpose of foreign aid? Is it to build bridges and heal wounds? Or is it to serve as a convenient cover for political maneuvering and covert warfare? The answer to that question is not just academic, it will shape the future of international relations, global security, and human rights for generations to come. If you found this deep dive eye-opening, share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's discuss whether USAID can ever truly be separated from the dark legacy of covert operations. And if you want more hard-hitting investigations into the truth behind global conflicts, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Thanks for watching.